some of the guests who are attending this session in the evening, or?
Oh, they have specially come for this morning session only. Yes, yes.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Kindness. And shall we begin?
Yes. So today we have 3 guests invited for the session. First is Mr. David Taylor and Mrs. Taylor. He teaches political science in the School of Oriental and African Studies.
Is it right?
Yes.
He
is also a
I've been a student there once long ago, of course.
Delighted to be. Yeah.
I wonder whether you were born or not as yet.
I think I was.
I joined the school in '55.
Yes, I was a schoolboy then, but...
You were a schoolboy?
Yes.
Right. Good. And
he's
next?
also a commentator on South Asian politics on television and radio.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. Excellent.
And next we have Margaret Josh. She is a nurse and cook in a nursing home.
Yeah. You are?
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. and Mrs.
Oh, that's right. I was waiting for your introduction. Right. So shall we begin?
Yes.
Please.
Thank you, Your Holiness. I had the privilege of meeting Professor Abdus Salam before he died on 2 occasions and heard his lecture also on the importance of scientific education.
Right.
And I was wondering if you could say something about the relationship in Islam between faith and scientific knowledge and how the two relate to each
Go
other.
together. Now, in fact, right at the moment, I'm engaged in finally tidying up the loose bits of a book which I have written on exactly the same subject. And because the subjects covered under this title are so many, and the references to scientific knowledge of man is also repeatedly made there, it would be impossible for me to answer this question even in brief here, because on this I have already thought in detail, I've gone into the depth of the issue. And I have kept in view the readers of that book who are absolutely without any previously held views on religion or science, who can be genuinely called neutrals. And I have attempted to give strong evidence, that is rational evidence, in favor of all that I have claimed, so that these neutrals which I have in mind would, I'm quite sure, reach the same conclusions that I think I have, as I have, not I think, as I have. So I think you better wait for that book to be printed, which is about in the process of being, sent to the pipeline now. Thank you. I hope I have taken up all the possible questions which agitate the minds of the people today, and some as have been agitating the minds of all the various philosophers and thinkers from the times immemorial. So, inshallah, you will find it a fit subject for your study.
Thank you.
Right. Please.
In South Asia, you presumably would have madrasas or religious educational centres for passing on or for educating in Islam. What do you do here for educating your children in specifically Islamic culture?
You see, Islam begins its educational program even before the child is conceived. This is where you must start your journey from. According to the Islam, such people serve the cause of man and God in an outstanding manner, who before they were conceived were prayed for. Their parents had prayed for them. And those prayers, when heard, influence the birth of even future generations, with certain conditions, of course, that man is born free, he can take either this course or that, but those who decided to be good, they were further aided by the prayers of their forefathers, etc. Once the child is conceived, the Holy Prophet repeatedly reminds us that you should take care of the unborn child, speak of good things, so that the child is also favorably influenced. And the moment he is delivered or she is delivered, the injunction is that you must say azan, the call for prayer, in the right ear, and the smaller version of the same azan, which is called takbir, in the left ear. This takbir is said immediately before the prayer congregational prayer begins. So far about the children, even before their birth, about the state of children in uterus. The Holy Quran also speaks of that elsewhere and in detail. So it makes a connected whole. Now, I have also, I think, referred to this subject in that book, but I leave that alone. When the child is born, many Muslims until now have been wondering why there was an injection of saying azan in his right ear, and he cannot understand anything. He doesn't understand any language. But Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam insisted and did it, and every Muslim does. Now we have come to know through the study of advanced psychology that children, even before their birth, respond to whatever is happening around. They respond to the shouts of the people in the houses. They respond to the good moods of the parents and so on and so forth. And they have been physically recorded by the scientists through instruments, electronic instruments and so on. And similarly, at the time of birth, whatever you say to the child, he may not understand it then. Of course he will not, but it is recorded. It is recorded somewhere in the subconscious, so that later on when the same things happen and he begins to hear of them, he has a feeling of belonging to them right from the beginning because of these earlier recorded messages. Now, this is a very important question, but it requires a very detailed answer. So I'm just giving you a brief account of what Islam requires us to do in relation to our future generations. The Holy Quran, speaking of the same subject, reminds the couples who are about to be married that fear God, remember that you will be accountable for what you send forth for tomorrow. That tomorrow evidently refers to the hereafter as well as to life here, and refers to the children born and sent forward into time. And speaking of them, the Holy Quran says, what you do today, Allah has an eye on that. And these actions of yours today will have their impact on the future you create for the mankind. So not only Islam speaks of the past, as I have just mentioned, it speaks of the children as they are born, and then the parents' behavior all through the lives of these children, which are going to influence their future. Now, how that teaching goes in detail as to what you should do and what you should not do is also mentioned in detail. As I said, this question requires a small booklet in answer to what your query is, and I understand you will understand. In brief, what I have told you would suffice for the time being.
Thank you.
Thank you. Please.
Your Holiness, how do we know? We've been taught to believe that Christ rose from the dead. How do we know? Has anybody seen? Was anybody there that saw him?
None. None saw him rise from the dead. And what is recorded in the New Testament is against whatever the Christians under the influence of St. Paul began to believe. Completely contrary to that version of Christianity which deviated from the right path of Christianity which Christ himself had left behind. That was the Christianity of Jacob, James, etc., the brother Jacob is also referred to as James in German. But some people believe there are two different brothers and some believe they're one, but forgetting that dispute, the person whom Jesus Christ appointed as his vicegerent on earth, it is him to whom I refer. He held fast to the belief in the unity of God. He held fast in the belief which had no concept of Trinity anywhere. He held fast to the belief that Christianity was as much a part and parcel of Judaism as any other sect of Judaism was, except with one difference. Jesus had appeared as Christ, and he had rehabilitated the central message of the religion that spirit must be brought to the focus of attention and not just the formalities. It was this which was misunderstood by St. Paul, and he thought Jesus did away with the form and only spoke of the spirit or the essence of the message. But the people I'm talking about, they are referred to as Ammonites or Nazarenes. They for centuries held fast to this view, which is closest to Islam, which presents Jesus Christ as a prophet of God, who did not rise from the dead in the sense he is described. He rose from the dead in the sense of every other human being rising from the dead for a new day of the hereafter. So, in brief, I agree with you, of course, but I am speaking of other concomitant evidence which you might not have thought of. Jesus Christ, according to the custodians of Christianity after crucifixion, was a man of God who was not little son of God. He was a prophet of Israel, but more than a prophet, a Messiah, who changed the emphasis of religion back from form of the people of that time to the spirit, which always is the attitude of religions at their beginning. So this is why I said Jesus rehabilitated the truth of religion by emphasizing the spirit but not rejecting the form at the same time. Right? Thank you.
Could I follow up that same question, sir? And I know that Islam recognizes Jesus and other prophets of the Old Testament as forerunners of the prophet. And I was wondering what you feel about the religious teachings of other traditions which do not belong to the Islamic and Christian and Judaic traditions. Buddhism, which in some respects has no God, or Hinduism, which recognizes God in a multiplicity of forms.
Yes. Now again, you have touched upon a subject which I have discussed in detail in my book, Buddhism and where it belongs.
Yeah.
Apart from other evidence which I have discovered from the study of original writings on Buddhism by the Buddhists, or inscriptions of on the stupas and rocks by the king Buddhist Ashoka, of course. I have proved the point that Buddhism was completely misunderstood by a generation of Western scholars who did not have any direct knowledge of Pali then, and who believed the Buddhist scholars representing Buddhism as they did, and they attributed no God to Buddha or atheism to him. Later on, it was the Western scholars themselves, particularly a great scholar from France, who noticed this fact and who started studying Pali language himself, and who studied the inscriptions on the stupas, etc. And he, it was Leblanc, you see, the French author and writer. His name would come to me. I know him so well. he proclaimed for the first time that the Western scholars have committed a deadly mistake. And he said whenever he had read about that, there was something disturbing to him, which was that a thing should have been inherited by a large number of people as a moral teaching without a God. He writes that my personal understanding of religion and things and morality did not agree with this concept. So he started studying Buddhism more in depth, and that is what which prompted him to study the Pali language, etc. So in the end he concludes that Buddhism was not a godless religion. Buddhism was created by God, and this is exactly what had been said before him by the founder of the Ahmadiyya community on the subject of Buddhism. So we already had agreed with him, and Hazrat Masih Islam categorically mentioned these things for which I have now found evidence. Because Hazrat Masih Islam, the founder of the Ahmadiyya community, spoke of all the religions in relation to Islam at different times, and because he had studied vastly the religions at their sources, so many times, because he was a great writer, he wrote about 90 books or so, so he would not give references every time he speaks of them, but it was for us to follow and find out the references. So he has said exactly the same things about Buddha, that Buddha was not against God, he was against gods, the gods of the Brahmins. And as such, he was misunderstood to mean that he was waging a war against God as such. He spoke of God, he believed in the hereafter, he believed in the devil, he believed in the goodness and evil. Now, all this he has mentioned. And I have traced these things back from the original Buddhist writings of Tripitaka, 3 baskets. And in my book you will find reference to these, and I hope inshallah after reading those you will agree that Buddhism was not without God. Similarly, there were other religions which appeared to be idolatrous, like Hinduism, but when you read them at the sources, you have to come to the same conclusion that their founders used practically the same terminology as other prophets in the world have been using. And they have been misunderstood as much as by the same terminology elsewhere by other people. I have particularly spoken of similarities between Jesus Christ and Krishna. Jesus Christ speaks of the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Buddha spoke of the lost cows of the house of God in India. Sheep were known to be the main flock, the main animal on which humans flourished or survived. So was the role of cow in India. So he speaks of cows and shepherdesses. So when you compare both the teachings in detail, you are amazed to find that they are talking of the same things. When Jesus speaks on behalf of God, he says that it is God who is speaking in me. I'm speaking of what God desires me to say. When Krishna speaks of his being like a Pied Piper, he holds the
Flute.
Flute. Flute. That's right. I'm sorry. He holds the flute in his hand, and he is depicted as holding a flute, which is a symbol of his religion. But how can it become a symbol of his religion? Gopiyas are shown around him, the tenders of cows, and he breathes or holds the pipe in his hand, indicating that it is God who breathes, and the voice you hear is not my voice, not the human voice, but it is the word of who breathes into this. So this is the message which you can read behind the lines of even Krishna. So all his life story can be rewritten in the light of these implied messages, which you can read only if you compare them with the phenomenon of religion elsewhere in the world. So to my mind, there is no difference whatsoever. Religion has a universal character. It has to be. If religion has not a universal character, then there is no God. As clear as that. Right? Thank you. On this, inshallah, when you read the book, you will find many questions answered in this regard. Thank you. Please.
Can I ask, sir? I think that you take the Holy Quran to be entirely revealed truth.
That's right.
Does that mean that you think it's absolutely outside time, in no way moderated by the circumstances at which it was revealed? I mean, I assume that if you're trying to make a people understand a message, you present it to them in terms that they understand. And this might mean that some of the language in which it's expressed or the concepts it uses are actually time-bound. They may change as society itself changes. Do you believe that, or
yes, they can,
not?
and they cannot. Either way is possible. If a message is time-bound, that message has to be related to a way of life which will no longer be the way of life for mankind in future. It may be related to certain areas which are confined to a certain people and which cannot be universalized. Then of course the message has to be time-bound and space-bound. But if the message itself declares that this message is related to the human psyche, then as long as human psyche does not change, the message should not change. It's only for you to judge the claim to be right or wrong. If the message is such that it relates to human psyche and its expressions, which vary with time, and it takes care of all the possibilities of the varying expressions of the same human psyche, then this claim is right. Then the book should not change. This is exactly what the Holy Quran claims to be.
Thank you.
Thank you. Please.
Please.
Thank you.
On the question of the interpretation of the Holy Quran, people over many centuries have spent a long time trying to interpret the recommendations in terms of specific laws, and in some countries these are applied very literally. In others, the feeling is that they should be developed and reinterpreted. How does the Ahmadiyya movement?
I think because we have some time now, because the questions are very quickly exhausted. So I can give you more time on this issue. This is a very important question, which is very relevant to the modern situation, political situation as well. You see, every book has been interpreted differently at a time when the people were removed from the original source, and it had to be. Every book, call it Bible or Gita or whatever you name it, every book is interpreted differently by the followers of the book at a stage when a generation was born at some distance from the time of the founder. And always this so happens when political power supported such people, when the material power had gone into their heads, so they subjugated the divine teaching to their own sense of superiority politically and in other fields of human advancement. Then the problems began. And at all such stages, the religious hierarchy has always taken the stance of imposing their religion upon others as they understand. And even they have committed unpardonable excesses against humanity and cruelties against the poor people in the name of God. Here Islam is no exception. This is the first thing which you must understand. Because Christianity has the same background, same history. Only then it was taken more seriously. Now it is not. That is the major difference. Christianity has lost its value as a valid coin for the day-to-day life of humans. You only believe in some sorts of humanity with reference to Christianity. You call it Christian behavior. But this Christian behavior is pronounced by its absence from all your organized lives. From political life, from economic life, from every other organized life, is absent. That is why it doesn't hurt. Your remaining Christian doesn't hurt. But where the people who believe in Islam belong to a past age in relation to your advancement, where they do take seriously not the word of the religion but the word of its custodians of a certain time, which you call medieval times, then these things are bound to happen to the detriment of the religion itself. You know, to the ultimate disadvantage of the people who hold these views. But these stupid people shut their eyes to these facts and don't even look back at their own history or the history of Christianity and other religions who have passed through these phases at different times and have always failed to achieve non-godly goals through following a godly teaching. When the teaching is misunderstood, the goals are all automatically misunderstood. And these distorted goals will not be held by God in His name. There is a law which you will never find change anywhere in the world, at any time of human history. This is what is happening to the world of Islam today. Because the West, unfortunately, treats the so-called Muslim scholars of today belonging to the majority sects and powerful sects as the true representatives of Islam. They do not care to go into the basic teachings of the book of Islam by studying the Quran and comparing the so-called Muslim custodians of Islam with the Quran itself and with the actions of Muhammad Rasulullah, the founder of Islam himself. Now if the Western scholars had gone into that comparison, if they had not accepted what was being said in the name of Islam by these so-called medievalists or fundamentalists, then the problems will not develop at all. I mean, they would understand the situation and they would pity them rather than be angry with them. They would pity them because the history of Christianity would also be invoked. It happened to us, so we know these things happen. And they will not pose any threat to the West or any other system because basically their view of Islam is wrong. And falsehood comes and stays and dies. It doesn't really change the phase of the thing, of the world. So that is how Islam should have been understood. But now I give a few examples, particular examples, which I also discussed during my recent tour of Germany with some very well-known German scholars who very graciously came to meet me during this tour. They immediately understood what I was talking about. Although I developed it further, but they nodded and they said, this is right, this is where we have gone wrong. We should have taken up the study of the Quran directly and compared it with the Muslims' understanding of today. I quote two examples, one of Salman Rushdie. You here in the West believe that it is Islam which not only prescribes a corporal punishment or capital punishment for for insulting the honor of a prophet or a book, etc. So blasphemy, according to you, is a crime which can be corporally punished here on earth by humans. You believe this is Islam. Well, that is not what Islam is. Not the Islam of the Quran, not the Islam of the Holy Prophet of Islam himself. So if you had challenged the Muslim world by attempting to prove this Islam from the book and from the Sunnah, I have been doing it. I have never heard one single voice in support of their distorted view, with reference to the Quran and with reference to the Sunnah. Now, blasphemy is mentioned in the Quran in many places with reference to different people, so that the perspective changes, but the concept of blasphemy remains the same. From one angle, it is blasphemy, from another, it is not. From the other angle, the same thing becomes blasphemy at another time, and so on and so forth. For instance, let's speak of the question of the Jewish people alleging that Jesus Christ was not a legitimate son according to the law of religion. The Holy Quran calls it blasphemy of the utmost type. The Holy Quran declares that the Jewish people who alleged Jesus Christ to be an illegitimate son were grossly wrong, and they will be punishable, but not by humans, by God. And the same Jesus Christ is held by the other party to be a little son of God, which again, according to the Quran, is a blasphemy of the highest order. Enormity is the word used by the Quran. Kabarat kalimatan takhruju min afwahihim. The Christians who call him a little son of God, they commit blasphemy of the highest order, which is enormity in the words of the Quran. Yet, no punishment. No worldly punishment at all. And again, the idolatrous people who commit the blasphemy against God by calling gods beside God, gods beside God, they are mentioned in the Quran. And look at the Quranic teaching. It says, do not abuse such people who believe in imaginary gods, and do not abuse their gods, lest they in retaliation abuse your one God who is a real thing. But the beginning of the abuse is attributed to them. Even in response, you should not do it, is the admonition to the Muslims. What a beautiful teaching. The verse goes on building this theme to a point where the Quran says, you should remember one thing, O mankind, that your understandings are all relative. Every people believe in something, and their belief is beautified to them by their own psyches. So you can't punish them, because what you believe to be beautiful may be ugly in the sight of others who look at you from a different point of view, different vantage point. So having discussed this principle, the Holy Quran says, leave it to God. He will decide in the hereafter who was right and who was wrong. And He will judge them accordingly, according to their acts and beliefs. So this is blasphemy committed against God by the non-believers, by the idolaters, when the Holy Quran goes on building this. If they do it, then even then you have no right to punish them. They may do it, but you can't do anything about it. This is what the Holy Prophet did all his life. He never punished a single idolater for holding the views of there being gods other than God. So the Quran goes on building the same thing until it mentions the Holy Prophet of Islam, around which a distorted image of religion revolves now. It always happens so. At the time of religious decay, it is far more than God. It is a prophet far more than God, whose honor is sanctified, whose position is raised, his status is raised beyond the mortals into the immortals. And the people become far more sensitive to the injury done to his honor than any injury done to God. This is again a phenomenon of idolatry which develops from the belief in the unity of God. This is how things begin to deviate. So the Holy Quran speaks of the Holy Prophet because the Holy Quran knows that a time may come when he would be idolized, and speaks of an event which took place in his lifetime, where somebody insulted him in the worst possible terms, when he had power to punish him, and yet nothing doing. The reference is given in the Quran, so no Muslim scholar can run away from this. He has to accept it as a most valid argument. The Holy Quran speaks of an event when Hazrat Muhammad Rasulullah, the founder of Islam, was returning from an expedition back to Medina. He was returning to Medina from an expedition which was taken during a very hot season. And Muslims were poor, generally speaking. The journey was taken without much preparation. And at times there was no food, no water. Everybody suffered so much that when they returned and reached, almost outside Medina. Then one of the chieftains of the hypocrites, whose name is Abdullah bin Ubay bin Salul, a known person in history, who according to all traditions was a hypocrite, but he had accepted Islam verbally, so his Islam was accepted. His claim was accepted, though his Islam was not understood to be the right one. He was an ex-chieftain of Medina. He was an ex-chieftain of such high status and influence that he believed that if Muhammad Rasulullah had not come to Medina, it would have been he who would be elected as the chief of all the Medinites, whether they are people of the book or the people of the Christians, etc., etc. The entire society of Medina was considered to have picked him as their future leader, by him and many of his followers. He said all this was disrupted by the coming of Prophet Muhammad into Medina, and everything went wrong until he gained such power that he himself had to bow to his authority and become a supporter of the Charter of Medina. What I am talking about happened after the Charter of Medina was passed. The Rasulullah had acquired the authority, the last authority, which was both organizational, administrative authority, and the authority of a judge, in relation to jurisprudence of things and justice, etc. All authorities were combined in him as one, under that article. When this happened, the whole background I have given to you, this chieftain stood up in company where even those were present who didn't agree with him entirely. He thought everybody has had enough of this prophet. He would be fed up of him and what he stood for. So he opened his lips and said, the most honorable in Medina will punish and turn out the worst and the meanest in Medina the moment we return. Everybody understood the reference, even his own son, that by the meanest and the worst he meant Muhammad Rasulullah. So he said he would chuck him out, he would throw him out of Medina when we return. This matter was reported to the Holy Prophet of Islam by many of his very staunch companions who were also, famous for their military mindedness and things. And they started approaching him one after the other, referring to this incident and requiring permission for murdering this man. They said for killing this man for the crime he had committed. The blasphemy, crime of blasphemy committed against Muhammad Rasulullah in the worst possible terms. This is the case we are discussing. Every time he refused. He had nothing doing. He heard, I know, I understand. No punishment will be meted out to him for this crime. Did he not understand the Quran better than all these people? Had I misinterpreted the Quran as I spoke before, the Holy Prophet should have rejected my view and said, this man must be punished with a penalty of death and no less. But the story goes on unfolding. When everybody was rejected, ultimately his own son appeared before the Holy Prophet. This son was known to be extremely devout and dedicated to Muhammad Rasulullah as a prophet of God. He built a case for himself. He said, I suspect that you're rejecting all of them lest I should be hurt. I suspect that you are doing it for my sake, lest I should be hurt, and later on, in one mad moment, I may take my revenge according to the Arab custom. If that is the case, permit me to kill my own father. That is how the sentiments were agitated and worked up. The answer was no. Nothing doing. Return to your place and do whatever you like. This is blasphemy in Islam. Now, if you present it to the Muslim world as such, if they put all their heads together, they cannot build a case against what I am talking about. Blasphemy is not punishable by the Quran or by the conduct of the Holy Prophet of Islam. And the last, act of this drama on which this curtains fell is even more beautiful. When later on this chieftain, ex-chieftain, died, Muhammad Rasulullah, the founder of Islam, decided to lead the janaza prayer, the funeral prayer of this man. So his decision was not political, not diplomatic. It was a decision well founded in his own concept of what should be done in Islam. He went to lead the janaza prayer, and on the way he was practically stopped by Umar, who was to be the second caliph, who was known for his strong character and strong-mindedness in many things. He asked the Holy Prophet, with respect of course, was it not you to whom the verses of the Quran were revealed, which said that even if you seek forgiveness for these hypocrites, God would not accept you? Was it not you to whom God had revealed that even you seek forgiveness for them 70 times, still God would not accept? You know what the answer was? Umar, leave my way. I will do it more than 70 times. Of course, he understood that this was an expression. But he also understood that using this as a sort of excuse for himself, he would use the word 70 literally and went to lead his prayer. Then the Quranic injunctions came specifically telling him not to even stand on the graves of such people. But this was permitted to happen because God wanted to leave a message for the mankind, for the progenies to come. that this is Islam, this is blasphemy in Islam. Now, if you go to the sources of Islam, the fundamentals of Islam, this is fundamentalism. Not the medievalism, which is given a misnomer of fundamentalism by the Westerns today. So this is Ahmadiyya position. We believe ourselves to be the fundamentalists. We go to the roots of Islam and stay put there, because this is the best Islam that we can ever conceive of. This is one example. And what was the other, which I said I would quote from the Quran? Yes. The death penalty for somebody who renegades his faith, and having become Muslim once, he turns back to where he came from, or begins or decides to become anything else other than Muslim. All the Muslim scholars of today are united on their plea that such a man, according to Islam, must be put to death. The Maududi, who is so much highlighted by the Western institutions, educational institutions, particularly and unfortunately my own ex-school, Oriental and African Studies, is full of his books and his teachings and things. He is so wrong in his fundamental understanding of Islam. Yet he is highlighted. I think I have a suspicion that it is done with a twist of mind, because the West wants the Western people to understand Islam in the light of how Maududi saw it, and give his understanding a sort of authenticity. But he believes in this, as I have said. According to him, anyone, speaking on the verse, La ikraha fid din, there is no compulsion in religion whatsoever. He says, yes, there is no compulsion in entering Islam. But when you decide to leave, the doors are closed. That's the only meaning he understands. La ikraha fid din. Imagine. He said, once one becomes a Muslim, he is trapped. And if he decides to leave, then he must be murdered before he can step out. Imagine, this is what they have done to Islam. Now, when you read the Quran, read such verses and other verses on the same subject, you leave no room for these scholars to misinterpret Islam, not the least. For that, they have to rely heavily upon the medieval Muslim scholars and their sayings. They say Ghazali said this. He understood Islam to be. Razi said this, and he understood Islam to be that. How can anybody else say anything against such great people? We say we are not comparing our view with theirs or yours. We are comparing your view, their view, with the view of Muhammad Rasulullah and Islam and the Quran. Now answer us. Read the verses of the Quran which speak of people daily doing this to Muhammad Rasulullah, entering in the morning the fold of Islam and leaving Islam by the evening. En masse. It was done intentionally to hurt the cause of Islam by the Jewish people. They used to say, and the Quran records it, said, enter Islam in the morning, leave it in the evening, so that you may take away others who would begin to share your doubts. They must have left for some reason. No murder is mentioned. Not one did take place. This is the point. No murder is mentioned, and never one took place in the same situation of anybody renegading. On the contrary, on the authority of such books as Bukhari, etc., you can find many instances of people, particular people, having renegaded without any punishment. The Holy Quran records many cases in generality, in categories. But now I talk of something which actually happened according to the traditions with a nomad who once came to Medina and requested Hazrat Muhammad Rasulullah, the founder of Islam, to accept him in the fold of Islam. He said, yes, you have become a Muslim. He stayed there for a couple of days or more and enjoyed the hospitality of the Holy Prophet. And then at the time of the departure, he respectfully requested him to return his Islam to him, as if it was a commodity. But a nomad was a nomad, a simple man of simple understanding. The Holy Prophet tried to argue with him to change his mind. Don't do it, this is good. He said, no, I have decided. He said, then there is nothing to return. Nothing for me to return. It's your decision, your case. You're not a Muslim. And he left in peace. This is what Muhammad Rasulullah, the founder of Islam, understood from the Quran, which was revealed to him and not to the mullahs of today. So what case do they have? The only case they build is with hundreds of references to the medievalists. They understood this from that. He understood this. That understood. There is not one reference to the Holy Prophet himself. That he ordered murdering of the people because they had done it, while the Quran says they did it daily, day in and day out. So that is what I said the Western scholars should do. They should go to the sources and not to the readers of the sources who happen to be born centuries after Muhammad Rasulullah at a time of political victory, a time of political domination. Now you will better understand this position if you relate it to the Christian history. The same thing happened to the Christians. What happened to Isabella and Ferdinand and their time, and here in England, what happened to the British governments who authenticated the murder of 5,000 women by putting them to stake on the allegation that they were sorceresses. It was done all in the name of Christianity. So do not misunderstand Islam by the misconduct of the custodians of Islam of today. This is all my request is about. Thank you. Yes, please.
Your Holiness, from what you've been saying, it would sound as if part of the danger is some innate human necessity to interpret too rigidly and therefore to set up these dreadful constructs, and all religions have done it. In that sense, perhaps not only a secular state, but a fairly secular pluralist mentality
Secular?
Is a much wiser position, whereupon one, I mean, there are those who say Christianity's gone, I mean, only Protestant Christianity, I think, has gone lukewarm. But at least one doesn't persecute anymore. I mean, it seems as if, from what you're saying, you can't say a religion that's taken too seriously, but a religion that is taken to provide such a whole way of life, of its necessity persecutes if it gets the chance, because it can't tolerate a plurality of belief or a plurality of position. And this would be true within any religion, that it uses its power thus. I mean, what's your answer to that problem?
You see, no religion authenticates this.
But it
intolerance, but the religious followers do, but not those who belong to the time of the founders of the religions. This is the point I'm making. Nowhere will you find any followers of any prophets at the time of the inception of the religion to become intolerant of others. It was always others who became intolerant of them. So when their own followers later on became intolerant of others, it had to be the fault of them themselves, not of the religion itself. See?
I do see that, but if intolerance is a core part of human nature, then what does one do about that?
This is what religions come for, to rectify this human nature
but it makes
by
it worse.
calling them to morality,
But
the fundamentals of morality. Now, they do not do it. This also goes into the plan of things, because according to the Quran, man was given the choice, that is, humans were given the choice of doing the right thing or the wrong thing. Now, once the choice is given, Allah repeatedly tells in the Quran that God will not forcibly set their courses right. Only God will make clear what is right and what is wrong. This is always the religious exercise everywhere in the world. The prophets come to make the state of affairs clear. If you do this, you are going to suffer. If you do that, you may be rewarded for this. But most people follow what is forbidden. Yet God will not stop them. But it is not purposeless. It is not futile, because after every such generation, a new generation which is born, it does not reach the ideals, but it is definitely better than the previous generations in their inhuman attitudes to other humans. See, the concept of beastly behavior keeps on changing with the progress of civilization. And what is civilization in this regard? It is a building tier after tier of moral teachings of different religions. They build the civilization, and they create the taboos which, although denied at certain stages, are at least respected in that sense that in the later stages man commits the same crimes but not so heinously, not so inhumanly. Now today, imagine the crimes committed by the Russian society when they were extremely rigid communists. Their crimes had some sense of legality about them, some measures of proving them to be legal and moral. But what about the crimes of Pharaoh committed against others, or Hannibal against others, and so on and so forth? So the human generations have learned to some degree from religious experimentations which prove not futile but temporary for a while, or transient, shall we say. Yet when first generation passes, the second generation which takes up is morally at a higher order. Always it happens so. So as a whole, human civilization builds. A time comes for people when physical punishment for disagreement is considered to be inhuman. Like in the Western society, in many places you have reached this conclusion at last. So the efforts of religion have not become futile all the time, for all times to come. They do leave a precipitate of morality behind them, which raises the human standard of morality every time religion comes and goes. But still there is a freedom. Right? Thank you. Yes?
We are just about to enter the third millennium of the Christian era.
Yes, that's right.
What message would you have for Western society in that next millennium?
The message I have for the human society as such, not dividing society into Western or Eastern or Christian or non-Christian, everything is inclusive, is let us return to the unity of God. That is the only way we can save mankind. Without the unity of God being practiced, I'm not talking of dogmas. Without the unity of God being practiced by humans, man cannot be unified. And the differences between colors and creeds and states would continue to create disorder in the world. Justice will be trampled upon. Only way to return to absolute justice is to return to the absolute unity of God. This is my fundamental belief, and this is my message for the new generations to come in the third millennium. Thank you. And because he's telling me the time is over, I'm so glad that you came, and it's so good to sit with such intellectuals as you are and to exchange views. God bless you. Thank you.